Hi everyone, this is Nishant. I am a manager at Amazon. I manage a small team within the Amazon, and this is about how to give an effective growth conversation with your employee. This week I learned quite a bit about how to give or have a growth conversation, and there are a few things that I think everybody can benefit from. If you're a manager, you may walk away with things that you can do differently to have a great growth conversation. If you're an employee, you can learn about what is the best way to understand the format of the growth conversation, or even insist with your manager on here is the way I want this growth conversation to go. First, what is growth conversation? It is an important tool in a manager's arsenal where they get to talk about the gaps that an employee has in their current role and level. Um, it is not so much about getting the employee to the next level, however, so that's an important distinction. So it's all about helping the employee understand the gaps and what they can do to close those gaps with specific strategies and things that they can do. So, ideally, a growth conversation can happens every quarter, if not every year. It really depends on how frequently and how much coaching that the employee needs. With that in mind, I want to share like a five or maybe a six-part approach to an effective growth conversation that I learned this week. Number one, preparation. Um, the manager really can benefit um, in terms of having a good conversation by sitting down and thinking about the employee that they're about to have the conversation with. Ideally, having something in a piece of paper or even a Word document is very good to do before having the conversation. This requires some time and investment, which, if you truly believe the employee deserves it, I think it should be done. This is how I would structure the growth conversation document. The first thing should have all the positive things that the employee has done since the last conversation that you want to really highlight and share with the employee. The second part is about the things that the employee can do to grow. Uh, Here, the second part is very important because this is where the rubber meets the road in terms of understanding the gaps and what they need to do better at. Focusing on this area a lot makes a huge difference. So the first thing, the way to structure it would be, you know, the area of growth should be highlighted. Say, hey, delivering results on time could be an area of growth. Follow that up with, if there is a specific example about what is it that the employee did that did not meet the the characteristics that you wanted them to see. Maybe they didn't, in project X, they did not do XYZ on time. Even though the deadline was set at this, um, then immediately following that, you can say X should work on, so and so should work on setting clear deadlines that are communicated to everybody and strive to meet them. And if not, they can do XYZ. So having one sentence, an example, and another sentence for what they can do to improve. And if you have feedback that you collected from peers or others, uh, that can go right below that. So you list these sections of growth areas that you want to share with your employee. This takes a little time, so that's why it's important to take a little time before the conversation so that you're well prepared going into it. Now, the third piece of this document will be to identify a plan. And this doesn't have to be very specific in the beginning in terms of um, doing the project X and da, da, da. Some of this you may have called out in the previous section, but I like to keep it more high level. Say, hey, the project you're working on, they approach it with XYZ techniques, or setting deadlines, or having a Jira board, um, to tell them that, hey, these are 5 things you can do in the upcoming months to really close those gaps, and making sure that each of the items that you're listing in this plan addresses each of the growth areas, as well. It's important to not have any gaps. Otherwise, you may end up with a few months down the line where you review it, and the employee has addressed all these things based on the plan, but it doesn't close all the growth areas that you have listed. So that's an important piece. And the last section is to say, what is the concrete next action item that the employee can take to start building towards addressing those growth areas. So maybe listing a couple of items that are easy to do that you can ask them to do by the next time they have a conversation or a check-in conversation with you. So having this document is the first step, is a preparation, having this clear set of growth areas and some of the strategies and the action items. So that's very helpful. So what happens when you get into the growth conversation? So I like to approach it with starting off with with a very open-ended question. So an open-ended question that I like to ask is, what do you perceive as your growth area in your current level? Do you have an understanding of what is it that you work on to grow in your current level? These are typically open-ended questions. I want to start off the conversation. This really shows the answers to this question really shows me if the employee has a clear understanding, or do I need to start from scratch and give them more information in the next section. So, and if the employee, and if you've had a regular check-in conversations with your employee, typically this will start off with 2 or 3 items that the employee and you have already talked about, or the employee had already introspected and is prepared to share it with you. um, they may structure the conversation as, hey, I know I need to work on doing X. I am currently working on it, and here are the areas I struggle with. Here are the things that I'm doing. If you get this in this order, great. Your employee has already thought about it, and you've done your job to help them understand what their gaps are. When they share these growth areas that they have identified working with you, um, make a mental note. If you have something to write on, make a note of what it is that they are saying that they want to grow in. So very important that you're listening and having a clear understanding of what the employee wants. Uh, there may be lots of tidbits and gems of information here that they are sharing about what they want to do to be a happy employee in your team. So very important that you're listening and taking notes at a time. And it'll also come in handy for the next section that I'm about to talk about. So the next thing that you want to do is compare what you have identified as the growth areas with what the employee has already telling you that their growth areas are, and look at the difference. Are there areas that they are sharing that you don't have in your list, or are there growth areas that they're not sharing with you but you have identified that you want to talk to them about? So for the second piece, you start off with the second piece with another open-ended question. Hey, thank you for sharing this. This is great. I really enjoyed listening to you about the areas that you've already identified. Looks like you've put a lot of thought into it. I also have a few more areas that I want to ask you about. How do you feel about your skills to do XYZ? So this is again kind of like an open-ended question, but you're leading them in a bit because they haven't yet identified this as a growth area, but it's still open-ended in the sense that you want to probe into what their opinion is about their skills in XYZ. And they may say as, hey, oh yeah, this is something that I have been thinking about, but I didn't mention it before, but I want to understand more about how I can do here to improve. Or they may say like, oh, I haven't really thought about it at all. This doesn't feel like something that is a gap for me. then you have a slightly different conversation about, hey, this is, you provide more examples and then you can share and stuff like that. But for the most part, employee may already recognize that this is a growth area. They just missed it in the first section. So the first two parts of the conversation really gets you and the employee in the same page as what their growth areas are. When if you have and the open keeping it an open-ended conversation allows them to think and allows them to share the growth areas instead of you exactly telling them this is your growth area. One tidbit here is to say, how would you rate your skill at XYZ? Is more kind of objectifying their growth area. So if they say, hey, I am like a 9 or 10, and like you can probe more into why do you feel this way, da da da. Or if they say 1, 2, it's like, okay, let's talk about this. Like, what do you feel is too low? So that gives you something to pivot on and have a good conversation. Then the third part of this conversation is where you summarize everything that the employee has said, and you read out some of the additional data points and information you've already prepared in your growth conversation document. So the growth area of delivering on time, you can say, hey, I 100% agree. You had mentioned this earlier that you wanted to work on this. I agree. Here are the concrete examples that came up during my feedback, collecting with other from your peers, and you can pull in some additional data to really kind of call that out as a section to improve on. Not spending too much time in each area because you've already had a lot of conversation. If you want to go deep into a specific growth area, you can talk about that. Excuse me, as well. So then you just basically at this point you're summarizing all the growth opportunities that had been discussed in the first 10 or 15 minutes. So we're on the same page, and then you pause, making sure you provide the space to the employee to respond to these growth areas, and you can have an open question. Say, hey, did I cover everything here? Is there anything that that is concerning to you? Is there anything that resonates with you more? Please share your feedback at this point. So at this point, the employee and you have had a back and forth conversation and you are almost in the same page. If not, there's a good time to pause and touch base with each other about the growth areas. So after completing this, the fourth part will be to share your ideas about how the employee can do, what the employee can do to close the gaps that they have already, that you and the employee are in the same page on. These strategies, some of them may have already been listed by the employee as, hey, I am, when talking in the first two sections, when they were talking about their growth areas, they could have said, I'm also trying to do XYZ to close this gap. You can, highlight that again and say, hey, I really like that idea that you shared about doing XYZ. I think that'll go a long way. So kind of reinforcing the idea that they have come up with on their own. They're more likely to kind of work on those if you are reinforcing what they're saying than to tell them what you want them to do, if that makes any sense. So then you go over the list of strategies that you have prepared. You give them some pointers or ideas. If they had other ideas, you can like pull from them as well. You can say, hey, I have given you a few ideas. Is there anything else that you think you can do? Is there anything that comes in mind that we can address, we can use to close the gaps? You list them down as well. So you can say, and then at the end of that conversation, you can say, thank you for all the things that you have shared, and I hope these strategies that I have provided you make sense. I really want to make sure you understand what you can do to close the gap, and that's a good kind of a closing point there. And the employee may feel like, hey, I understand it. I think I know what I work on. So that's a great thing to hear. If they're like, I'm a little confused about a few things, you can probe into them and see if you can clarify those points with them. If the one thing to remember is how you want them to perceive this conversation. If you approach this conversation as a very aggressive person who really want that person to do exactly what you tell them to do, they may walk away from the conversation as feeling attacked or not having good sense of what they need to do, confused, and maybe even angry with you. You really want to avoid that pitfall. Instead, what I would recommend is to think of it like a team sport where you're having a back and forth conversation and you're on the same team as the other person and you both want to succeed. Um, Being a partner means you are not necessarily fighting with the other person. You're not necessarily forcing that other person to do exactly what you want them to do. You want them to succeed in some ways even better than you. So the frame of mind is super important in this conversation. So that brings to the next point. If you're a partner, it is so important to also um, tell to get feedback, right? So as a manager, you're always thinking, hey, I'm right, I know I have all the ideas that I've shared with the person, but getting that feedback on what it is that you can do better to have this conversation is going to be super valuable. So asking a question like, how did this conversation feel like for you? Do you feel you have everything you need um, to proceed? uh, the second question is a little tricky. You don't want them to just say yes or no. You want to be more of a dialogue and get more feedback about what how they felt about this conversation. The last thing I will leave you with is, after this conversation, it is important to merge some of the new things that you've learned from the employee with the notes that you had and prepare and complete the document that you started off with. Ideally, you take a snapshot of the document, like make it into a PDF or something, and share it with the employee. So this actually is not only helpful to kind of keep a record of the conversation happening, it also helps you reflect later on when you want to want to have continued conversation, or when you want to do the check-in conversation. So it's really important that you share these notes or the document that is complete with the employee, with a note saying, hey, thank you so much, this was a great conversation. Yeah, I'm attaching the notes from our discussions. If anything doesn't make sense, let me know. Here are the action items that we talked about that we can work on together. If you have a deadline that you want to share, can by XYZ date, can you make sure you do Y and share it with me, and we can have a follow-up conversation. So that's a good way to wrap the whole discussion in a bow and say that, hey, this, hope it is valuable for you. Let's work together as a partner. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. I just want to share my learning about having growth conversation. If you find this useful, please like, and if you want to see more of this content, subscribe. I will put more such videos about some of the effective ways that I like to manage, and hope you find it helpful. Thank you.